All right, so welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about Oswald Spengler's Man and Technics. You guys might know about Spengler as the writer of uh, Decline of the West, both volumes, which is, I've talked about before on the show, and I'm sure you've heard about just being in these circles. It's a pretty monumental work. Um, and I guess to talk about Man and Technics, it's kind of a very, very condensed version of the material he talks about in Decline of the West, and not remotely comprehensive, but some of the core ideas distilled uh, in a very basic fashion, I guess. Because this is a very short work. It was 80 pages with like 20 pages of introduction. So the actual body of it is only about 60 pages. I guess I want to start off with a quote in the beginning that I thought was really, really interesting. Uh, so I'll just read it in its entirety. It says, "Man was, and is, too shallow and cowardly to endure the fact of the mortality of everything living. He wraps it up in the rose-colored optimism of progress, which no one actually believes in. He masks it with literature. He crawls behind the shelter of ideals, so as not to see anything. But impermanence, birth, and passing is the form of all that is actual, from the stars, whose destiny is, for us, incalculable, right down to the fleeting concourses on this planet. The life of the individual, whether animal or plant or man, is as perishable as that of peoples or cultures. Every creation succumbs to decay, every thought, every discovery, every deed to oblivion. All around us we sense traces of lost courses of history that end in some great doom. All around us the ruins of the past works of dead cultures lie before our eyes. The hubris of Prometheus, who thrust his hand into the heavens in order to cast down the divine powers to mankind, bring with it its own fall. What, then, is our prating about the everlasting achievements of mankind supposed to mean?" Uh, so a lot to digest there, but the very first part, um, we talk about these ideals as a way to cope with mortality, which is quite interesting. And you can almost look at all of everything around us, this culmination of modern society. 99% of it just seems to be exactly that, our ways of coping with our own mortality. We talk about uh, Elon Musk and Bill Gates' brain chips and this transhumanism and this hope that uh, progress in the technological sense is going to eventually save us from death. We'll be either truly immortal or functionally immortal through uploading our brains to the cloud. All of this, and then even in a less literal sense, our coping of mortality of just passing time. I mean, how much uh, of the culmination of progress is just more Netflix to distract us from the fact that you know every second we grow closer to our death and all of our time is just being wasted. So um, I thought that was a really interesting thing to start with. This is from the very first chapter here, talking about ideas and its reflection on mortality. Um, but there's also something very interesting as far as um, his view on world history, which is why I brought up Decline of the West, and this is a idea he brings up there, is we see history as progressing, right? We see everything that we create is the greatest thing that has ever been created, and more importantly, is going to be permanent, right? We can look at, the Pyramid of Giza and its current dilapidated state, and then look at the Empire State Building and not see that one day the Empire State Building will be exactly as dilapidated as the Great Pyramid is, right? Or the Sphinx, or uh, the Colossus of Rhodes, right? All of our current achievements they're going to be relics of the past, um, which now is even kind of ironic, given the name of myself and my channel. If you've ever read the poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley, um, uh, talking about Ramses II, King of Kings, look upon my works ye mighty and despair, and that was the inscription on all that was left of like one column of a massive palace, right? So everybody has this idea that our civilization is going to be the endless one, the permanent one, the peak of all uh, human construction, which is just not true, right? We need to not only our own mortality, we need to come to terms with the mortality of a society, right? Our culture's mortality, our civilization's mortality, um, because none of these things are permanent, right? I mean, we might think that we're the special ones, right? We have it figured out. Our civilization is going to go to the stars, and we're going to unite the entire galaxy under our fist. But history has shown us that that's not going to happen, and that's why it is so funny that people act like collapse is so unrealistic. They say, "Oh, there's no way there's no way the internet could ever go down. There's no way the power grid could ever go down. There's no way, our current government could ever be usurped. There's no way it could be, uh, there's no way it could fall apart." Which is just, are you a student of history or are you just an idiot? you know, um, that all these things have happened in the past and they will happen in the future. There's no way that we can avoid it. Um, and on that thought, talking about the greater sense of the book, the impermanence. This is something I kind of wanted to relate back to things that Ted Kaczynski has talked about. I know we've read Industrial Society and its Future before in this book club, so some of you should be familiar. Um, but Spengler talking about um, the system and its impermanence, and especially in a technological sense, that's a lot of the same things that Ted brings up. And he says that, well, Ted says that we've endured this long-standing situation of prosperity and this massive interconnected industrial system. But if there's one thing that history tells us, or even just nature tells us, the more complex the system, the greater its destruction, right? The easier it is to completely annihilate it. Um, and we've kind of reached this point in a technological society that it really is only going to take a few things for everything to go to shit. And we see, I mean, just to relate to current events, we're talking about Texas. We have entire power grids down in Texas, and people are saying, you know, they managed to save certain things, but if things had not gone well, there are potential for some of these grids to be off for months, right? And people act like our society is so impervious to these kinds of things, but we literally had an entire state's power grid almost out for several months. Could you imagine that in the first world in a modern society? Well, I can, and a lot of people are starting to come to terms with that. But like we said, the larger the network, the more unstable it is. It's going to collapse. Um, so I'm going to go to the chat for a second. And so Civ says, would you consider on a racial level civilizations to be just different variations of that race's civilization, or no? Uh, well, very much so. I mean, people say, what is it? Culture is downstream of genetics, and then, uh, well, Spengler wouldn't say this, but a lot of people would say civilization is downstream of culture, whereas Spengler kind of sees it as the opposite. Culture is the end product of civilization. But in a general sense, uh, you have culture downstream of race and genetics, and then civilization downstream from that. So, theoretically, your civilization is going to reflect the people that make it up, and it really shouldn't take a rocket scientist to explain that. Obviously, the people within the system are going to be the main factor that decides the quality of that system. Um, And that's very much something, even a couple months ago when we read Evola's Handbook for Right Wing Youth. Right, there's a quote in there that says, um, "A civilization with a poor system composed of great men will be a better civilization than the absolute perfect system uh, composed of shitty men. Not honorable, not intelligent men. Uh, Even if they had the perfect system, it would be a lower tier civilization than one that was not perfect but composed of very great men." Um, and once again, that's a jumping point, a jumping off point to go to talk about Spengler again. He says something very similar. He talks about, I believe he says, ideals are cowardice, or ideology is cowardice. And I think that this is tied to this quote here about how, our ideals are a way to cope with our own mortality, right? We think that the proper system, the proper advancement, all of this stuff is going to be what saves us in the end, but that's really just a way of coping with the fact that our lives are finite and our civilization is finite, and there's certain things that we need to be doing that we aren't doing right now. Um, and some people would take offense to the fact that he's saying ideology is cowardice. They're like, oh well, don't you need ideology? To an extent, yes. I mean, obviously, you need some kind of framework if you want to enact change in society, but it really starts with the individual, right? You need to actually uh, be a good, strong man and participate in not necessarily a society, but a friendship, a kinship with your fellow men, and uh, do that in a way that is not guided by idealism, right? You need to be pragmatic about it, which I think separates, your politician types from your thinking types, right? So some people are more concerned with pure ideology, and other people are concerned with pragmatism. Well, from this, it sounds like Spengler is definitely a pragmatist, right? So then Siv says, I meant that as in when or if the West collapses, would the new society still be the West or something new entirely? Well, once again, I've talked about this before. We talk about different ages and different spirits in a kind of esoteric sense, and Spengler is, his major contribution is talking about the Faustian spirit, right? Um, but if you read Man and Technics, if you read Decline of the West, he's talking about the decline of the Faustian spirit, right? He thinks this Faustian spirit has run its course and is kind of self-destructing. Um, so, and once again, I don't want to go into this too much because I've talked about it before, but people are saying, oh, we're going to reawaken the Faustian spirit and save it from corruption. And I say that's not how things work. Once it has run its course into self-destruction, there is no more Faustian spirit. There will have to be a new spirit that will arise. So when you say, will the new society still be the West? No, it will. I mean, it might in nominally be called the West because there's this East-West divide, obviously. Um, but as far as having the same culture and civilization aspects of the West, absolutely not. Um, honestly, my prediction is something a lot more in the way of um, post technological collapse. I'm starting to think that we'll end up in a kind of a Greek situation, a Greek city states, small polises, um, very agrarian, interconnected societies where our leisure is less about Netflix and more about expansion of knowledge. And maybe that's optimistic. I don't know. But that's my prediction. But that's not really rooted in anything other than my gut instinct. I can't really point to a reason I would see that. I guess I just see that because our current situation is unsustainable and is going to collapse. Um, so I just want to return to that quote for a second. One last part when he says, "Rose-colored optimism of progress," and that is how we define mortality, right? We see this constant advancing. Um, and he has this little side note. I mean, it's in parentheses after progress. He says, which no one actually believes in, which is a pretty amazing. Uh, I won't say snide comment by Spengler, that he says this whole idea of progress is just a lie. And I've talked about this personally before, so I think it's kind of funny that Spengler also agrees. Um, progress is just a way of bundling up a certain ideology and giving it the qualities of intrinsic good, with just this abusive language, right? It's not a, it doesn't actually mean anything. You can call anything progress, Uh, okay, well, I was gonna say something really not Trovo friendly, but never mind. You could probably guess. Um, you could say anything, and if you call it progressive, it doesn't automatically become progress. Um, so yeah, it's this, I like to say weasel word, right? Um, and Spengler recognizes that, but even deeper, he recognizes that we come up with this entire idea of progress to think that we're going somewhere, right? To think that there is a direction for our civilization, when in fact that is just a lie. We are going to collapse just like any other civilization. Um, Now, and one more thing I want to say to Civ, you said in the chat, I think I get it now. Uh, don't think there's anything to get. I mean, I'm just saying things. This is my opinion. Um, I've read what I've read, and I think what I think. I'm not some authority. Don't think that you need to align your thinking with mine, and that is going to be the key to truth. Uh, so I mean, you obviously maybe that might not be what you meant. Maybe you said I get what you're saying. I get where you're coming from. But don't think you need to get it right. I'm not spouting the truth. I am just saying what I think. So back to man and technics. What exactly is technics, right? So he said, um, he goes into this very early on. Technics. He says tactics of living, um, and he says how all animals have these tactics of living, and man as a creature is what you would call a creature, a beast of prey, right? It is a hunter. We hunt other animals for our sustenance. We aren't herbivores, um, and that means we need tactics, right? Certain evolutionary tactics to uh, preserve our survival and to find that prey for us, right? And so that developed in humanity much more sophisticated than in most other creatures, right? So in the same way that I don't know, a spider, it makes a web. Our tactics became, we carve a spear out of wood, right? Um, and then he has this new distinction where he talks about making the weapon versus using the weapon is the two different uh, modes of tactics, right? So you have one that's kind of preparatory and another that's the actual living action. And I think most techniques in this sense can be put in one of these two categories. Um, Even today, I mean, it's not that much different. There's the tactics of, making weapons, whether those weapons are a spear or a nuclear missile, right? And then the tactics of when and how we use those weapons. um, so he goes on in this evolution of techniques, which is um, interesting, but I don't know how much he says that's exactly groundbreaking. Um, but I guess towards the end, when he looks at the future of techniques and what is going to happen in society, I think that's the most interesting. And and I know I keep going back to this, but it's almost like a proto Kaczynski, um, because obviously Spengler was not dealing with the same kind of civilization that we are, right? Um, he is he's has not witnessed the kind of technological advancement that we have. He has not seen. I mean, he's seen a pretty industrialized society, a very interconnected society, but nothing on the scale that we have now, right? I don't even know what the industrial farming situation looked like, but Obviously, right now we're dealing with something that is so beyond, the comprehension of someone 100 years ago. Well, I don't want to say beyond the comprehension because I'm sure plenty of people could have predicted this. But I just want to point out that things have very much changed. But he's still recognizing that man is starting to become uh, not the master of his own fate, right? Um, and he does bring this up. How exactly is technological society? How is it advanced? What exactly is advancing it? And at this point, um, well, especially this point, but at his point, at Spengler's point, he was starting to recognize that it is entirely self-sustaining. It continues to advance for the sole reason that it must prolong itself. And we're starting to reach the late stages of this, right? Um, we're talking about sending people to the moon when we still have people on the streets fucking starving to death because there's no jobs for them. So uh, despite the fact of whether this is the best use of our resources, we need to keep advancing because this is it's become a beast that we can no longer control. And just a thought experiment to put this in perspective is look at someone like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, and or even Elon Musk for that matter. So we look at these people as being the deciders of what exactly goes on a large scale. They are the ones that are dictating what is going to advance and where funds are being put and things like that. But if you think about it, they really aren't. Um, Elon Musk is one man. Elon Musk says, uh, "Oh, I want I want X and X ship to go to Mars in Y years." Okay, now he can say that, and he can move a bunch of his pawns around the board. Uh, distribute resources where they need to go, and say uh, exactly what his vision is, but he still needs people to enact that vision, right? You need an army of code monkeys, of engineers, of even administrative business types, and they're the ones that are going to actually advance that. Um, but in the same way, they couldn't survive without an Elon Musk, but Elon Musk couldn't survive without them. So you do have this symbiotic relationship. But the thing is, it's not like it's simultaneously they need each other to survive, but they're also both entirely replaceable, uh, right? Because if Elon Musk doesn't do it, Jeff Bezos will. If Jeff Bezos doesn't do it, Bill Gates will. If this one engineer doesn't do it, then some other engineer will. If this administrator isn't going to move the departments around, then some other administrator will. So we have this interchangeable parts that one person, even the head of the system, typically um, we think of this head as being so utterly important, but it's not true. I mean, that could be replaced just as easily. So, what exactly is sustaining the system if no single piece of the system um, is integral to the system? Well, that means the system must just be um, self-sustaining. It continues based on merit of its own will to survive. Right? The system has become an organism in itself, and it is going to continue to increase and advance until it inevitably collapses. And that is what a lot of people, your Kaczynski types, but now even more and more today, they're starting to see this aspect of the system. It is very, very fragile, right? Um, and the more it grows, the more fragile it gets. Uh, and off of that, there's something that Spengler talked to about how this technics, right, the tactics for living, have gone so far beyond the means of one man, right? One man can make a spear, one man can build a house, one man can dam a river, right? All of these things can be reasonably be achieved by one person in a reasonable amount of time, right? But now Can one man make a gun? No, not really. I mean, I don't see. Uh, I mean, from scratch, right? I mean, obviously, you could make something resembling a gun in a few hours in your garage, but where are you going to mine that metal? Where are you going to harvest the gunpowder? Where are you going to are you going to forge your own tools? All of these things you have to consider. Um, so the modern uh, techniques are beyond the range of one man, right? You no longer can live for yourself, right? You need to rely on a system of greater and greater complexity in order to preserve those tactics of living. Um, which, once again, this is another reason I can kind of consider this work to be like a proto Kaczynski, because he says a lot of the similar things. But if we look in this purely technics sense, um, technics has extended so far that we're no longer looking at um, the single techniques of a man. We're looking at the group techniques of a race, of a culture, a civilization. Um, and because of that, it is getting more and more fragile. Um, and going off of this, just something that I've been thinking about when people say um, how, oh, if you're anti-technology, blah blah blah, where do you expect to draw the line? Well, I think a really easy place to draw the line is um, what can one man do with his own time and his own hands, right? Um, so people are like, oh, well, agriculture is technically technology. Yeah, but agriculture is still very much in line with nature. I mean, one man can plow his own field without the need of any kind of advanced uh, structures, you know, and that doesn't mean we can't cooperate. We can have a bunch of different people working on the same farm. That's okay. We can have a bunch of people building the same house. That's okay. But once it gets to be something that is so disconnected from what one man is capable of, that just makes it all the more fragile, right? Like, just imagine a computer. You can't make a computer from scratch. You need to already have the raw materials harvested. You need to have them turned into, various components, and then you can finally put those components together, right? It would be impossible to actually, go out into nature and build a computer in nature. It doesn't make sense. You by the qualities of that computer, you need to have a large interconnected system just for it to exist. So does that make it um, a good and natural thing? Well, that's kind of an opinion. I say no. But more importantly, does that make it a sustainable thing? And especially, absolutely, the answer is no. There's no way you could have something like this that could possibly maintain itself in the event of our inevitable collapse, right? So don't expect computers to stay a while. So I think that's a lot of things I was thinking about with man and technics. But I guess the main things to take away from this is one, you are immortal. You are a mortal, not immortal. You are amortal. Two, society is mortal. Society is going to die. Civilization is going to die. It is going to collapse. Um, Faustian civilization is not permanent. It is going to suffer the same fate as Egypt, the same fate as Greece and Rome, um, the same fate as, I don't know, whatever Babylonian Empire existed. Um, yeah, that is impermanent. Uh, and then three, one of the main reasons for this impermanence is how our techniques have gotten out of hand. They're unsustainable. They're too interconnected, and they're they're their own organism. They're stronger than man himself. They can exist without the input of a single man. Every single cog in the machine is replaceable for the machine's um, existence. It is going to continue to try and advance itself, and there's nothing a single person can do about it. Maybe if all of the cogs simultaneously fell off, we would have a problem. But a few cogs here and there is doing absolutely nothing. And that is going to be the ultimate downfall of uh, technological society, is when it gets so large that, rather than the cogs falling off, the cogs uh, all fall off at once, right? It's going to be the cogs were glued on, and they were moving too fast, and the glue burnt out, and now the entire thing crumbles. It's not a great analogy, but you get exactly what I'm saying. Um, so if anybody has anything they'd like to say, or if they'd like to call in, uh, Cassius, I know you said you found a mic, so I'm always looking forward to talking to you. Um, but yeah, if anybody else has anything that they want to say, uh, I will open up the lines. Join the Discord chat. And I swear, if nobody joins, uh, in however long, I am going to end the stream, and I know you guys don't want that. Oh, there we go. Who's in? Who do we got? Cassius, what's up?
Hello.
All right, about time you finally made it on. So, what thoughts did you have to share today? Are you listening to me on the stream, or are you listening to me through Discord? Because there's going to be a slight delay, so make sure you're talking to me through Discord and have Trovo muted.
Um, yeah, that's weird. Okay, so one thing I liked was when he got into the inevitable collapse of this Faustian culture, and is there anything about what Spengler says about human technics that might help us avoid recreating another culture, especially one so destructive as the Faustian culture and its ultimate machine age that we're in now?
So you're asking how we could possibly avoid the inevitable collapse? Um,
Yeah, because one thing, this book was so brief in general, it was hard to really apply learning about techniques to specific problems. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the thing is, history has told us, as well as nature, that all systems are going to collapse, and it might not look the way we expect it to look, right? I mean, we even talk about the collapse of Rome. It wasn't just like one day Rome just stopped existing. It kind of had this slow decline to the point where it was unrecognizable. And then you had the East and West Rome, and the day that Rome actually uh, collapsed, in quotation marks, is very much disputed. Um, so we can't exactly pinpoint how it's going to happen, but we can guarantee that it will happen. And rather than saying how can we avoid uh, having it happen, our question should be how can we mitigate the negative effects? And that is something that is going to be so far beyond the powers of a single person, right? I mean, there's so much that we could be doing now, starting to decentralize and, de. Um, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. We need to disconnect, right? All of these interconnected systems. People need to have small local networks, not just of people, but like food networks, right? I mean, if you get your food from other countries, if you get it from thousands of miles away, that is such a fragile system that could easily have you starving, right? So the if the government was smart and the government wasn't just trying to um, prolong itself as a system, they would be totally advocating for this kind of decentralization. But as of right now, this is something that you need to do as an individual, right? You need to mitigate the negative effects via preparation, via finding how you're going to provide for your own food. How are you going to provide for your own electricity? Can you survive without electricity? Right? I mean, we're seeing people in Texas. The answer is no, right? They absolutely cannot, and it's bitten them in the ass. Um, and this is just the early days of this. It's going to be happening more and more. You need to be prepared for these kinds of events. You need to be prepared for a decentralization, and you need to have these resources available to you. So I know that was a pretty long-winded answer, but I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. As Homo sapiens, we're perfectly capable of living in harmony with nature, and that's where from where our techniques evolved from. But is there a way we can contain our, I don't know, societal, cultural techniques, these kind of uh, large group manifestations of human tech, like big industry? Is there any, maybe, is there a way we could live that would prevent these things from reoccurring now that the cat has been let out of the bag?
Uh, that's another really good question. And I have been thinking about this, and in one way, in the most cynical way of thinking, we can never do that because we will never overcome certain things like human hubris and human ambition. Um, no matter what, we will always think that we will be the ones to break the cycle. Um, but in a more uh, idealistic sense, how could we avoid this? Well, I would say you need to start at the foundation, right? Uh, we need to have those small local networks and have everything provided, but then not substitute that with these larger networks, right? It's like, okay, maybe we can build up industrial society as long as we have, our small localized non-industrial society as a backup. You know what I mean? And obviously that means as far as resources go, industrial society will never be able to be as large as it is now, right? But we could still enjoy certain modern niceties despite having the safety, right? So I would say, I don't know if this makes sense, but never move on to step two until step one is perfectly secured, right? Once you have your own locally sourced food supply that is totally secure, okay, then you can start using surplus resources to, create something like an internet, right? But the thing is,
Mm,
don't make it so the second the internet is out, you're absolutely screwed. Make it so the internet is a supplement that can make life more convenient, but isn't the end all be all for your survival. Does that make sense?
yeah.
I think that answer goes into what I was gonna do or ask you. Do you think the internet's gonna just fade away? That's and like, and if industrial society collapses, would that just be another thing that just dies along with, I don't know, any sort of industry that was supporting it?
Um, so specifically talking about the internet, yeah, that's the other thing. People act like the internet uh, is this intangible thing that is going to go on forever. Uh, and obviously that's not true. I mean, these servers are physical things that need to be supported. You need to keep the lights on, and pretty soon we're going to see. Oh, this is actually something. I encourage you guys to watch this video. This is a Keith Woods video. He talked about a book called Dark Age America. So I didn't read the book. I only watched the video. But the book kind of presents a scenario of this of what America would look like while collapsing. So not like post collapse, not pre collapse, but during the collapse, what things are you going to see? And he says one of the very early things you're going to see is internet rations or outages, right? Um, once once it becomes more difficult to keep these servers running, right? For one, you're going to have to, you know, limit, peak hours of internet usage. Maybe you'll only get internet for a few hours a day. And specifically, certain sites will be entirely lost, right? You know, maybe a massive conglomerate like Google can keep YouTube's servers up, but then your smaller sites, they absolutely will not be able to, right? And then even your stuff, like your Wayback Machine, they're not large enough to keep the cache archives of all of those sites, and that's going to go down. So your access to information is definitely going to be restricted. And I'd say it's not unrealistic to say this is going to happen in the next, you know, 30, 40 years, right? I mean, we're already seeing power outages the second, we put strain on the power grid in Texas. And it's only realistic to think that we're going to see internet outages, once these servers can't be kept up. Um, but I don't think that necessarily answers your question as to far as what the internet is doing and is that integral. So uh, could you elaborate on what exactly you're asking?
Well, I meant just like the internet in the form of itself, or no, the internet in general. I meant would that just last in one form or another? Maybe not in its grand worldwide web that it is now, but maybe like a niche luxury good, like I don't know, gold or something.
That's a pretty interesting question, and I don't think I know enough about um, how the internet works and how the data is stored that I could see, how a person could, well, not a person, how a group of people could somehow manage to prolong its existence after its inevitable large scale collapse. But for the immediate future, I think I could see it being a luxury good in the sense that, like, well, kind of how people, how people were panicking about net neutrality. They're like, oh, the net could look like this, certain packages that you have to pay for. Um, well, once it becomes harder and harder to keep servers running, you are going to see this. You're going to see either you only get internet for a few hours a day, or you're going to pay exorbitant sums of money to be able to get unlimited access to all the sites that you want, right? And then certain sites will be entirely, off grid. Sorry, I mean they'll be off. They won't be running anymore, and certain sites are going to probably be seized by government control. Um, so yeah, as far as being a luxury good, I totally see that happening sometime in the future.
Maybe I should have made that question sound different, like just computing in general, like this sort of storage medium that we see data being collected and stored on. Maybe that could survive in one form or another for millennia.
Oh,
Like,
if you're talking about like hard drives and things like that, I mean, oh for sure, and I mean you already
I mean,
see
yeah, I meant
this.
like books and like a new form of books, basically.
Well, you see people, they call them, data hoarders, right? Um, they're trying to collect as much stuff downloaded offline as possible, right? Because they're preparing for this day that inevitably the lights go off. And
Yeah, I'm
how
doing
much?
that right now.
Yeah, and how much of that data can you keep in, uh, a hard drive that you're gonna hide underneath your desk, right? Um, and yeah, that's totally going to be I mean, that will probably be, our relics, right? When we look at ancient Greece and we see how many, of their manuscripts we can salvage, people will be looking at us and seeing how many hard drives they can salvage from the wreckage of the Empire State Building. uh, um, so yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that's going to happen in the future.
And I mean, to give an example, some time ago, a scientist made a new form of data storage that basically encoded data into a glass some sort of glass structure that makes it basically last for like millions of years. I think
That's
the
pretty
first
cool.
thing they put on there was a fucking Superman movie from like the 70s. I forget which one.
Yeah, of course, because that's the peak creation of Western culture was Superman, and not something like Homer's Odyssey, right? Um, but that is quite interesting, though.
I think the internet could get more regional and certainly less uh, geared towards entertainment. It's going to get real practical.
Well, I think you could say that about everything. Everything's going to get more regional. I mean, there'll no longer be a central power grid. It'll be small local power grids, um, and then people are going to become much more tribalistic. Warlord types. Uh, that you won't be able to freely migrate from state to state, right? Uh, Texas is going to protect their localized power grid with their lives, and if you're just going to try and waltz in and use their resources, you're going to be in for a rude awakening. And once again, that's something that is going to be in our future.
I think anime might become a scarce resource in the U.S.
I think anime will be. I've actually thought about this. There will always be a demand for things like pornography, and despite obviously we have opinions on how that's not good, but I could imagine that downloading pornographic movies could be worth its weight in gold, and selling in a post collapse kind of society. Um, and I would see the same thing about anime. This luxury good that people are going to be clawing over because it has become so scarce. Uh, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy to think that, but I just
Yeah,
don't.
the Coomers are gonna kill each other over a fucking hard drive,
Yeah,
like it's Fallout or some shit.
because that's the thing I don't see. I don't see human vice going away, despite the fact that we will have a dose of reality. There will always be a market for certain things, right?
I
Uh,
mean, on the nice side, if the internet dies, at least those sites would probably go down with it. So it would be less. It wouldn't be everywhere like it is now. That's something to look forward to.
um, and that's always when you talk about the internet, there always is this. There will always be good with the bad, right? Because in the same way that we can complain about technological society and its dehumanizing nature, it has allowed all of us to communicate with each other and connect. Um, whereas that might not be possible without industrial society, but on the other hand, it might not be necessary. uh, so wherever there is a negative, there's always going to be the silver lining, and then so the silver lining is if the internet collapses, we won't be able to talk to each other. We won't be able to communicate and share information. But maybe the overall conditions for living will be in such a degree that we won't miss that anymore. um, well, did anybody else have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I've been waiting to jump in with just some thoughts. I caught most of the stream so far, so I don't want to repeat anything. Catch me if I am. But early on in the book, he's talking about that, like the nature between man and Technics is really something found in nature itself. Um, as in, like using technology, things outside of ourselves to um, to thrive and better our tribe and better our society. And later in the book, he gets into the key distinction is that we can invent and choose the tools that we use going forward and pass that on to future generations. Whereas the beaver is always just going to build a dam, it's never going to build a better one. The bee is just going to build a hive and it's never going to build a better one, and so on. we're very unique in that regard, and I don't know if that process is reflected anywhere else in nature. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my takeaway is that I think that technological progress, where we are now, it has definitely clouded our vision of the future and taken away some things that gave us dignity in the past, replaced it with junk, really. But I also think that this is more of a temporary state that we're in. I think that this sort of process and knowledge, this development we've gotten is inevitable, and I don't think it can be taken away. So to retreat into the woods and not have um, not have certain technologies that have made our lives clearly better in some ways, which I don't think anyone is advocating for that 100%. But I think the important thing is we are really not the ones that are determining how we use this technology. Um, I think it's a symptom of our time and the power that exists now that directs how technology and its infrastructure is placed in society. For example, I found this article once, and it was talking about like it started a discussion because there was an artist depiction of cities if the roads or the space to people to were all that there were. And the roads were just um, empty cliffs into nothing, and it showed just like this very perilous like pathway with lots of like wide open cavernous space between buildings. And it was highlight that instead of building technology around us as individuals and our lifestyles and our natural tendencies, instead to the point where we are developing technology and infrastructure around the technology itself, like cars and factories and things like this. And it's gotten to this point where we are now losing meaning as individuals and as humans. And if we don't address it, then we're going to start seeing automation to the scale where it's replacing workers as humans and therefore making us unnecessary, which is dangerous. So I think that's kind of what's got me thinking the most about what was written in this book is that really the development of technology is inevitable, but it's within our power, or we need to make it within our power to decide how it's used and implemented in society. And I think that there's definitely a stratum of elites that are choosing to have things progress this way, not for the benefit of society as a whole, but because this structure benefits, ultra rich, international elite.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to talk about there, but I guess I will disagree in the fact that I don't know if there is a way to have technology without it being eventually corrupted and eventually leading to a collapse. Um, and I say that because, like I said, no matter what, you can't escape certain human vices. Um, and one of those vices is, laziness and harm avoidance, right? And we'll always want to take the easy way out instead of, fighting the proper battle, right? And if that means we could have robots farm our food for us instead of farming it ourselves, that's what's going to happen. Uh, and So I see that as almost an inevitability. And while you can prolong the system, right? And I think we would point to something like, um, oh, imagine if Hitler had remained in power. Do you think that eventually Nazi Germany wouldn't eventually fall to a level of degeneracy that we're seeing right now? And I would say it would have to, because I mean, if you look at it, it was a very industrial-based economy, and part of the thing of industry is it needs to grow. It's part of technological society. You know, that industry needs to grow. It needs to have constant expansion, and that means that. Who is this? Do I have to mute somebody now?
My shit loud.
Yes, I'm muting you. All right. Let's see, where was I? So I was saying, so that constant growth, eventually Germany would have to bring in immigrants, right? Eventually they would have to expand into this globalized market. Eventually they would have to do all these things because humans are going to fall into their own vices. And maybe and I don't want to say that absolutely, right? I'm sure maybe there is a certain system that could prevent that, but on the other hand, I want to agree with Spengler, who says, ideology is cowardice, right? And really, if you fall back on thinking that there's some type of ideal system, an ideology that is going to save you from this inevitable collapse, you're just rejecting not only your own mortality, but the mortality of the system. So really, the only thing you can kind of control for is your role inside of this industrial society and how you're going to act, and whether that's going to be in accordance with this more mortal coping or with this mortal acceptance.
Yeah, I agree with you partially, but I think I wish I could shill for this next book to have a center, because from what I read from that, I think it would maybe lend to the point I'm about to make. Maybe it's not even a book worth reading because I feel like I already read the summary and kind of have this idea. So in our society, we've promoted this very capitalistic mindset, where people that generate profits are people that generate value, and value has been only thought of now as material wealth and benefit to not spiritual, not social, really. Um, it's kind of fallen to the wayside. So that relates to have a center, because he talks about the shift. There's been a shift from, at one point we looked up um, heroes in civilization and culture in terms of folklore, or people that upheld standard, like knights and things like this. They weren't. They didn't reap benefits materially for people. They went. They that exemplified our standard uh, in terms of ideals and morals, and did so in a way that our culture, we spread it elsewhere, and that shift has moved towards the idea of the genius in society, like um, Limitless, like this. That's kind of an extreme example, but the movie Limitless, where this guy, he takes pills and then his brain is just unlocked and he can just do anything that he sets his mind to, and he starts making all this money, and he's really successful in social life. Like, that movie is really appealing to people that just look up to these big fat cats in Wall Street, or even Elon Musk. Just love what he does, and that individual, he's got all this intelligence. And Limitless kind of passes that on to the masses. Like, well, imagine if you could take a pill and you could be this guy. You could be the genius. That genius is you. And nowhere in our society, like we have a poet laureate, that young black girl that did slam poetry for Joe Biden's inauguration. At one point, poets and authors were not looked up to as people that create escapes through fiction, or just create awesome battles against Thanos or something. It was at one point they 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 articulated they expressed our values, and romanticized our values in our society in a way that touched the individual that wasn't a genius, that didn't have the to provide material benefits to the rest of society, but they could still be part of society by to have the same roles, have the same character, to prove the same thing to the community that these heroes did, and poetry and things like this. And I think this, you brought up the Third Reich. I don't know the history or anything. I know that very smart scientists and like we're leaning towards industrial society, but I think they sort of understood this this stance on value providers, capitalism. They understood that they were not really the people to be the most venerated. They really encouraged the veneration of people that amplified their values the most, and things like the Hitler Youth were, training young people to um, to be one with their values instead of training young scientists to refine facts. I don't know. Maybe I'm making too large of a generalization. I don't know much about that, but I think that my point here is that we've lost this romanticism that once always held a role in societies before us. But without it, we have no romanticism. We only understand things in terms of material gain. And I think that combined with technics is something to be feared and avoided. But I think that with that role in place in society, the value created wouldn't be able to just like import hordes of immigrants to keep their empires going. There would be just like this universal standard and understanding that that's not what makes that's not what makes the people. And technology would be sort of molded into that image instead.
So you said a lot, but I would say to just
Sorry, yeah, you
well,
should feel free to cut me off. I'll keep
well,
going.
no,
If you
no,
don't
I
stop
just
me.
mean it'll be hard for me to address everything. But so I guess your primary point is you're saying if we fundamentally change, if you change like the philosophy of society, you could somehow make it work, make industrial society work if it is in harmony with those philosophical values. Which point I
I
could
don't think
say,
we're philosophical people. I think philosophy is reserved for people that that are very good with words and structuring their thoughts, which most people can't understand philosophy in those terms. They can only understand it in um, in cultural terms and spiritual terms, to be like as vague as possible.
well, yeah. So,
But
but you mean our values and our moral system, our ideals, etc. If those were in line with industrialism, then it could work. Or if industrialism was in line with those values, then it could work. That's what you're suggesting.
um, could you restate that?
So, so you're saying that part of the reason industrial society has such a hold over us collectively is because we have abandoned certain, and I use the term philosophical, but I mean you could also say moral ideals and values. And if instead industrial society were to conform to those values and maintain those values, it would be okay. Is that what you're suggesting?
What I'm saying is, the Western society, especially in America, we place a large emphasis on individualism, and um, we've also kind of relied on the Protestant value that founded this country and influenced its culture, kind of kept it in check for a long time before the individualism, the self interest um, really started becoming a problem. Are willing to sell out their own people by importing more immigrants just to continue their industry, that sort of thing. Um, we've lost that kind of core identity, higher than ethnicity and nationality, which was keeping things in check. And what I'm saying is, we've lost any obligation towards being a moral person, not screwing over the society that's keeping you, because we only look up to people. We encourage people that only produce um, value, material. I'm sort
Um,
of losing it now.
well, no, I think I get exactly what you're saying, right? It's that because of our degradation of morals and our pursuit of personal ambition, vice, etc., and our willingness to screw each other over for material gain. That is one of the issues that exacerbates industrialism. Am I? Is that a good summary? Or
Yeah, I think that the dominant idea now is really like, don't do harm to other people because you don't want them to do harm on you, and that's kind of like the universal standard everyone really operates on in this country. And that, combined with the technological progress, is really designed to reduce suffering, and that ultimately is going to make people complacent or useless because they won't have to work. Um, Whereas if we had different set of values, where if people had a more spiritual purpose, and life was more than just what you can consume and create for other people in terms of your physical benefit, then I think things would look differently in the way technology progresses.
so, I will disagree on 2 points. The first being you can't fully divorce the progress of technological society from the progress of human, I guess, our human values and degeneration. Um, so to say that these are totally independent of each other is just not true, right? I mean, you could even look at something like you talked about roads and cars earlier, right? Um, so the evolution of roads allows society to be more spread out, right? We can have automobiles, so our cities get larger, and we have multiple cities, and rather than um, you and I've talked about this before too. There's a certain alienation that comes with that. You can grow up in a small town, and you can leave that town and go work in the big city, and that's never going to change as long as an industrial system exists, right? It allows for these certain things. And if you do allow for those certain things, it's going to promote certain attitudes, right? You're abandoning your home, you're abandoning your family, your people. You're going to be more disconnected, you're going to be more alienated, and all of those things are going to result in a lack in religiosity, a lack of family values, a lack of any desire other than individual gain, as opposed to making your hometown better. Uh, so that's the first point, right? So you have this trajectory of industrial society that is also intertwined with the trajectory of human degeneration. But then also, um, all the other factors of human degeneration, you know, certain things that I'm not allowed to talk about, a certain group of people that might be behind things, a certain destruction of the church and the faith, and a certain expansion of liberalism, liberal ideology. All of that,
Mormons.
yes, the Mormons. All of that is allowed to be more widespread and accessible because of technology, right? Um, could you expose more children to gay couples if it wasn't for syndication of television? Would you be able to have most underage uh, teenage boys watching hardcore pornography if not for the internet? Um, and these are things that are allowed to exist because of industrialization that well not saying allowed to exist, that are allowed to proliferate, because if not for industrialization, it wouldn't really be a problem, right? You know, one dude, you know, uh, uh, you know, drawing, you know, sexually explicit, hardcore pornographic drawings, and distributing it through the village. I mean, that's not obviously not good, but it's not a huge epidemic problem, right? It's very easy to solve. Whereas having, a massive internet, you can't just, flick a switch and shut off pornography. Well, I don't know, maybe you can, and our government just sucks. But do you kind of get what I'm saying?
I think
40,000 years ago, we had the Venus of Willendorf, right? It's always been here. I think the problem is this technology of technology that allows it to get into our homes and reprogram us to have this minute to minute attention span that just destroys us. That's the problem.
Yeah, I just want to my comments are like almost over. Let me just refine it. I'm still kind of processing these ideas, so I appreciate just thinking out loud and hearing back. But I'd say we just haven't had enough time to adapt to how fast things have progressed, and it's gotten to the point where I'd say it's like we're gluttons for all these pleasures, that we're suffering from this in terms of what we can do. That eating is fine when you have to do that to survive, but the mindset of a glutton, like eating and eating and eating, and you're not running out, is really the poison. And we really haven't had enough time to realize what this rapid progression of society is doing, to recognize that we're actually just fat and unhealthy in terms of our spirit. It's not a direct question. I'm not saying we're just consuming too much media. It's the same type of sin, I'd say.
Yeah, I think our society has a church-shaped hole, so to speak. Society has grown much faster than the church has.
But some of the other things we've read, Propaganda by Bernays and Amusing Ourselves to Death, kind of showed that rather than an absence of religiosity allowing technological society to expand, technological society's expansion led to that decrease in religiosity for varying reasons. So we can't, like I said, you can't divorce these two trajectories. So in the same way, I don't think you can just say, oh, technology would be good if X. Well, that's so idealistic, and the way that we've seen is that it can't be controlled, and it's naturally going to occur with all these problems that we've stated, right? You'd say, oh, well, there wouldn't be a problem with technology if we just got rid of the major glaring problem with technology. It's like, well, yeah, that's self-evident. That's a tautology. It doesn't mean it's realistic, right? We haven't seen that, and that's not the way that history has gone. Was that the final word? Does nobody have a response to that? Or does somebody have another thought that they would like to say? Am I silent? Can nobody hear me?
No, Morpheus is talking in voice text. He's trying to tell you something.
Oh, I have him muted because he was being his.
he was talking for a moment, but he muted himself.
All right, I will unmute Morpheus. All right. Wait, how do I? Oh, what is it? Oh,
it's in Discord. They made a voice text.
Yeah. Okay, Morpheus, you are now allowed to be
heard. He wants to say the gamer word.
Please don't say the gamer word. All right. Well, if nobody has any more relevant thoughts, I mean, the stream's been going for about an hour, and that's usually where
I do have something, but I think it's best that we keep that off the stream.
Okay, we can talk about that afterward then. Because I'll still hang out and talk. Um, all right. Well, thanks everybody for showing up. I'll post a video later today, and for those of you waiting with bated breath for me to announce the winner of next week's poll, um, you might not like this, Solidus, but the two ties are Outline of Sanity by G.K. Chesterton and Can Life Prevail by Pentti Linkola. And I think both of these are pretty good books, but since I'm the tiebreaker, uh, given that it is the Lenten season, I think we have to read a nice Catholic author. So I think I'm gonna have to give the dub to Outline of Sanity. So that is what we're going to be reading for the next 2 weeks, and I'll update with a stream schedule once I figure out the best way of breaking that up. But thanks everybody for watching, and I hope to see you again.